I believe it's time to introduce Steve Rhodey, and maybe Steve would say a few words about how he personally became involved in the issues that he is addressing this morning. Steve?
Thank you, Dave.
I think you need to mute. Okay.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be with you in any capacity. I'm wearing a few hats today. Before I begin my formal presentation, I want to echo what was hinted at, which is that we're very proud of our Friday forums. We've been at this work for 20 years. Many of you know the story of ICUJP and its founding, convened by Reverend George Regas, who we have been celebrating. And today, as chair, I want to offer an open invitation to everybody who wants to recommend a speaker for these programs. We love drawing upon the wide circles that each of you travels in your interfaith work, in social justice, in education, in advocacy, in anti-racism work. You are all a font of information and connections. And we pride ourselves on these Friday forums, now with Zoom being able to draw from across the country and across the world. So I've put my email address in the chat. You're always welcome to contact me on anything having to do with ICUJP. But if you yourselves or your colleagues or people you know, you think would make a suitable speaker for a future Friday forum, we're planning already into late February and available dates in March. So just send me an email, we can chat, we're very open, we rarely reject a good speaker. So I just want to make that, we make that offer at our board meetings, but I wanted to extend that invitation to everybody here, and any other active members of ICUJP, please extend it to them as well. It's surprising in our busy lives that you'll come upon an event, a speaker, a sermon, an email that will trigger the idea of a speaker. So please take that to heart on a continuing basis, and always feel free to contact me. I am grateful this morning because in some sense, that's what happened leading to my talk today. Because Dick Bunce, who's with us, former chair of ICUJP, former board member, active with us, and as you heard this morning, very active in so many other activities as well. But a few weeks ago now, Dick reached out to me with a really kind of disconsolate message, a message of concern.
Yeah, unplug me because I plugged my phone in. Just put it back where the phone in.
Here's this chart.
Susan's, there you go. And welcome, Daryl Myers. If you'd go on mute, anybody else, Dick Bunce, ironically, if you'd go on mute, it just helps to remove.
And Anthony.
Yeah.
I think Anthony needs to mute.
Yeah, it's just surprising. It's surprising how people come through the room, or a puppy or something, and unexpectedly. So
Anthony Manousos.
Anthony, if you can go on mute, avoid any background sounds. So
or Carol Francis can mute anyone.
Right.
I'm muting people, so please keep going.
He's doing it. So Dick reached out and he recently reiterated his concerns. And I'm, with his permission, reading a portion of an email to kind of frame what is motivating my talk today. And my talk is going to be interactive. So I hope everyone will pay attention, and we'll have a lot of space for some conversation as well. What Dick said is, my concern, Steve, is that the die seems cast. The extreme gerrymandering, the abundance of petty vote suppressing schemes, the pressure and manipulation regarding secretaries of state, the impact of the Electoral College on the battleground states. Add to this the death threats that rain upon GOP reps who step out of line, and even poll volunteers reminiscent of the Nazi brown shirts, and I just don't see a way out. Plus those two outlying Democratic senators. I just don't see a way out. So that really concerns me, that a bright, smart, active person like Dick Bunce, and I think would have these deep concerns, but I think he simply articulated concerns that all of us have, as well as in our families, our children, grandchildren, friends. There is a brooding sense that instead of coming out of the Trump era with some hope, that Trumpism existed long before Donald Trump, is continuing now, and on the political side in this midterm elections this year, and then in a presidential election in 2024, we may look back on these 4 years as an interregnum, as a brief respite from an assault on democracy. And I am deeply troubled by that. By way of a brief introduction, for anyone who doesn't know me, although I'm looking at all these screens, and by and large, I think I know everybody. I retired from the active practice of law a few years ago. My later years as a practicing lawyer was a civil rights lawyer, using the Civil Rights Act to vindicate First Amendment rights of clients, especially those trying to speak out at the Venice Boardwalk against regulations by the city of LA that was clamping down on free speech. And then I've had a wide array of experiences as a civil rights lawyer, and previous to that as an intellectual property lawyer. Throughout this period, as I tell young lawyers, I simply was committed to my practice, but to carving out time, as I say in my introduction, to work through the ACLU, death penalty focus in ending the abomination of capital punishment, Bend the Arc, a Jewish partnership for justice, tapping into my my faith-based side, and then the interfaith work of ICUJP. And woven into all of that, I've written 2 books on the Constitution and freedom of assembly, and scores of articles and book reviews, all of it with a theme that we have always had a precious, delicate balance in this country. Someone recently, as a prompt, asked, what does America mean to me? And it's a bittersweet answer, because on paper, America means a lot. On paper, America means the opening words of the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution and the addition of the Bill of Rights, and these aspirational values that were intended to stand as a beacon. But in those very documents, those founding documents, lay the original sins of this country, that a person like Thomas Jefferson could write the words, all men are created equal, as he retired every day when he wasn't drinking wine in Paris, retire every day to Monticello, where his wealth and leisure was supported by the labor of enslaved people. So the country is actually built on deep myths and deep incongruities and inconsistencies. That very Constitution I would lift up a few moments ago has several provisions which perpetuated slavery, which extended the time for the importation of slaves into the United States, that for a bizarre purpose of voting power in the North and South counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a human being. Those words are indelible. They are in our Constitution today. They've never been amended, although we fought a bloody civil war and then got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But no one has ever removed these stains, these direct indelible stains on the Constitution. And in many ways, these myths and fractures and conflicts have been swept under the rug for over 250 years. And that's why today we can have this roiling debate over teaching our history in public schools and elsewhere. The notion that we are bound by a whitewashed history that forces in this country want to perpetuate by obliterating the true history of this country. And later in this talk, we may get to some of that. So I'm moved by this notion that this is our political system. It has embedded in that Constitution the Electoral College. It has embedded in that Constitution the unfairness of a state like Rhode Island having 2 senators and a state like California having 2 senators, despite our disparate populations. And we labor under these quandaries and inconsistencies. And I don't know if this country ever will marshal the effort to amend the Electoral College and to ensure that our presidents are based on the will of the people with one person, one vote, and assure that it is the majority of this country that elects our presidents and our elected officials. So, and against and overlying all of that is this deep vein of racism in this country. And for an interfaith group, we cannot go much farther without mentioning the force of Christian nationalism in this country, which would seek to impose a theocracy, despite the words of the First Amendment, which create a separation of church and state. So all of those elements are ever present in this country. And many of them played their role in the election of Donald Trump. And I'm not going to rehearse the 4 years of Donald Trump. This group spoke out and resisted many of his initiatives. And as a result, we know that history, and we know how Donald Trump became a megaphone for those deep racist, nativist, populist, authoritarian instincts that have always been present in the American society. They've been cabined in, they've often been limited by other institutions in this country. But we've seen how fragile our institutions are, and that's what I'll be talking about today. There are dire predictions about the future of our democracy. Every past has been a present. Every past has been a present, meaning any dark period in American or world history that you look at, there were people like us living during those periods. And many of them were enlightened and alert and aware of what was going on. But there were other darker forces that through combinations of force and hatred and prejudice and power and violence were able to control those societies. And I believe that the United States is in one of those existential moments. Now, we all pride ourselves because these are the years we live in, and we think these are the most fraught and consequential years because these are the years we're living in. But I want to emphasize today that what we do today and tomorrow will matter, and that this is part of an international dark period. We know that countries across the world, in Europe, in Hungary, in Turkey, in Brazil, and the Philippines, and we could all list more examples, in the Middle East and in Israel and elsewhere, that we are seeing a consistent pattern that once you unleash the kind of rhetoric and action that we see here in our own country during the Trump years, you see it spread around the world. So I don't think it is hyperbole to be deeply concerned about the future of democracy in this country and elsewhere. Now, coming to the heart of these remarks, what I want to talk about is January 6th, the buildup to January 6th, the true nature of that insurrection. I want to talk about the efforts that Dick Bunce mentions in his message, that already Republican legislatures throughout this country are changing the landscape. January 6th, in many ways, was a rehearsal. January 6th was a tryout for an armed struggle against our constitutional democracy. And the months that preceded January 6th were a rehearsal when the Trump campaign refused to accept the results of the election, launched the Stop the Steal big lie, but saw that they were up against state laws and state legislators and officials who were not going to go along with the big lie. And who had in place various protections within state and federal law to protect the election. And as I will talk about in a few minutes, the efforts that are being made state by state to change all of that, so that the 2022 election and the 2024 election could look a lot different. Now, we do have constitutional institutions in this country. And my ultimate theme today will have a note of optimism. I've often told people I'm a glass half full kind of guy. It's just my small c constitution that insists that we not be in despair, that we not shut down, that we not recede from the public square in times like this, and that we use the old labor notion of organize, organize, organize when we're looking at the situation that we're confronting right now. So let me trace some of the material that I've gathered today Eventually, I would like to get to questions and answers. I'd like to get as much information across as possible that you will be able to take from this meeting to your own organizations, your colleagues, your families, your friends, and then to try to give some answer to Dick Bunce's despair. Leading up to January 6th, there was a movement in this country to ignore the electoral results of the 2020 election. The January 6th Commission in Congress will this year begin to hold public hearings and ultimately issue a report about January 6th. I think we're going to learn a lot from that, more than we even know now. But this work is already going on with a variety of organizations and initiatives, and I want to empower you to keep track of a lot of this information. A new organization called Intersection Index was founded 2 weeks ago. And what they did was to look at the January 6th insurrection and try to get some sense of not only private citizens who organized and attended and invaded the Capitol on January 6th, but people in public positions and in positions of authority. So that we do not think of this as a mob. Many newspapers and even current reports speak of January 6th as a mob. A mob is, for me, a disorganized large group of people who come together in a particular space to act out certain mutual goals. I don't think it was just a mob on January 6th. And what the Insurrection Index has found has already identified over 1,000, actually 1,011 individuals in the public realm who played a role in the election subversion around the 2020 presidential race. What they've done at the Insurrection Index is to go through exhaustive source material. They found that 213 incumbents in elected office and 29 who were running as candidates for positions of power in upcoming elections were among those at the rallies and at the insurrection on January 11th. There were 59 military veterans and 31 current or former law enforcement officials, 7 local school board members, all of whom participate. These over 1,000 individuals come from 393 organizations that played a role in subverting democracy. This index is the brainchild of Public Wise, W-I-S-E, a voting rights group, and their executive director, which is deeply concerned about the ongoing threat posed by these individuals. We also know that 147 members of Congress objected to the certification of the election, and the list names elected officials in state legislatures across the nation, including Arizona, who conspired in these efforts to block the certification of the election. Examples help us get our minds around this. Jake Hoffman, a lawmaker in Arizona's 12th district, wrote to fellow Republicans the day before the Capitol insurrection, urging them to pressure Vice President Mike Pence into blocking Biden's victory. His message said, Vice President Pence has the power to delay congressional certification and seek clarification from state legislatures in contested states as to which state of electors are proper and accurate. That, of course, that entire sentence is false legally and constitutionally. A week before the insurrection, 17 Arizona state lawmakers wrote to Pence, urging him to, quote, block the use of any electors from Arizona. And among them was Mark Fincham, a member of the Arizona House of Representatives, who was present at the Trump Stop the Steal rally in Washington, and is now vying to become Arizona's Secretary of State. Among those 59 individuals with a military background was Christopher Warnagiris, who last June became the first active duty member of the armed forces to be charged in relation with the Capitol assault. And he's facing 9 counts of assault and violent entry, but he's permitted to continue serving within the training and education section of the Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia. My point in this section is to emphasize that these are people who were then active and remain active in various government positions. Now, there were other enablers, and I am very concerned about the enablers of Trump and the enablers of the big lie and the Stop the Steal efforts. You know of me as a constitutional lawyer, now retired, so I take special umbrage at members of the legal profession who enabled Trump to do his work. I have in mind here in California, John Eastman, former professor at Chapman, and I'm going to take a moment on this because I have a personal connection to him. John Eastman got the ear of Donald Trump, and in the days leading up to the election and after the election, conjured up a theory which was the legal/intellectual basis for what those messages you just heard me read from state legislators and others. He cooked up the notion that Vice President Pence could block the certification of the election. John Eastman also represented Trump in the Supreme Court in lawsuits that tried to block the election and the certification of the election. I know John Eastman. I've debated John Eastman. Years ago, we were invited to debate the separation of church and state embedded in the First Amendment. And in the midst of the debate, John Eastman said that in his view, every state in the Union has the right to establish an official religion so that each state could form an official religion by decree of its state government. John Eastman clerked for Clarence Thomas, and Clarence Thomas holds those views as well. It was shocking to hear John Eastman say that, and I said I was shocked to his face and told the audience why his theories were half-baked and bore no resemblance to the Constitution and the interpretation of the Constitution. But John Eastman went on now to find power, to seek out power, and to support Donald Trump's insane theories about the election. Well, a friend of mine, Mitch Paradise, a colleague, a friend, a teacher, we filed a complaint against John Eastman before the State Bar of California, and citing all of the ethical rules that John Eastman has broken. At about the same time, a group of former judges, policymakers, lawyers, and others separately filed a complaint with the State Bar along the very same lines, although more elaborate in detail. Unfortunately, as we speak, the State Bar turned away the complaint that I filed and the complaint that the other organization filed, saying that we had no firsthand knowledge of John Eastman's unethical behavior. We've appealed that decision because we think firsthand knowledge includes the memos that John Eastman wrote and the actions that he took, all of which are in the public record. So those cases will go on. The reason I spent a few minutes on this is because Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and others are being held accountable as lawyers. And that's a process that is going on. It is one of the institutions that my talk today is emphasizing that are going forward in our democracy to hold tight to the rules, to the rule of law. And if we have the patience to see those proceedings through, we may see some of these people held accountable. As far as January 6th is concerned, the Justice Department under Merrick Garland is actively holding accountable those who broke the law on January 6th. And I think it is worth a few minutes to take stock of what those prosecutions are and to have a sense of how democracy is fighting back, how democracy is using its existing principles within the bounds of law to hold those accountable who have attempted and are attempting to destroy that very democracy. There have been more than 725 defendants have been arrested, coming from almost all 50 states and the District of Columbia, arising out of the events before, during, and after January 6th. More than 225 defendants have been charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees, including 75 individuals who've been charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily injury to an officer. Approximately 140 police officers were assaulted on January 6th, including about 80 U.S. Patrol Police and 60 from the Metropolitan Police Department. Approximately 10 individuals have been arrested on a series of charges that relate to assaulting a member of the media or destroying their equipment on January 6th. Approximately 640 defendants have been charged with entering or remaining in a restricted federal building or grounds. 75 defendants have been charged with doing so with a dangerous or deadly weapon. 45 defendants have been charged with destruction of government property, and over 30 defendants have been charged with theft of government property. 275 have been charged with obstructing, influencing, or impeding official proceedings or attempting to do so. Now, there have already been results as an outcome of these prosecutions. Approximately 165 individuals have pleaded guilty to a variety of federal charges from misdemeanor to felony obstruction, many of whom will face incarceration at sentencing. 145 have pleaded guilty to misdemeanors, 20 have pleaded guilty to felonies, 6 have pleaded guilty to felonies, have pleaded to charges relating to assaults on law enforcement, 4 face statutory maximums of 20 years or more in prison. And some have already been sentenced. Approximately 70 federal defendants have had their cases adjudicated, received sentences for their criminal activity. 31 have been sentenced to periods of incarceration, 18 to home detention, and other defendants have been sentenced to probation with no term of incarceration. What's extraordinary in this is even in the midst of responding to January 6th, our system has accorded due process to these defendants. There is a proportionality principle being applied to ensure that there are gradations of punishment based on the seriousness and the degree to which these individuals engaged in their criminal conduct. As I often say, and may come up later in the area of the First Amendment, we cannot throw out our Bill of Rights in order to go after insurrectionists and other wrongdoers. The very way in which our system addresses this attack on our democracy is itself emblematic of the strength of our democracy. Now, there's one indictment I want to pay special attention to, because on January 13, a grand jury in the District of Columbia returned an indictment charging 11 defendants with seditious conspiracy and other charges in relation to January 6th. According to court documents, Elmer Stewart Rhodes III, 56, of Granbury, Texas, was the founder and leader of the Oath Keepers, and Edward Vallejo, 63, of Phoenix, Arizona, were together charged with other defendants in a conspiracy to engage in sedition. They come from the states of Virginia, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. They're charged with corruptly obstructing an official proceeding, conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiring to prevent an officer of the United States from discharging a duty. The indictment alleges that Oath Keepers are a large but loosely organized collection of individuals, some of whom are associated with militias. Though the Oath Keepers will accept anyone as members, they explicitly focus on recruiting current and former military, law enforcement, first responders, and the conspiracy charges allege that following the election, Rhodes conspired with his co-defendants and others to oppose by force the execution of the laws governing the transfer of presidential power. Beginning in late December, via encrypted and private communications, they and the co-conspirators coordinated and planned to travel to Washington, D.C. on or about January 6th, the date of the certification. They and several of them planned to bring weapons to the area to support the operation. Listen to some of the specific allegations that the government has lodged. The defendants conspired through a variety of manners and means, organizing into teams that were prepared and willing to use force and to transport firearms and ammunition into Washington, D.C., recruiting members and affiliates to participate in the conspiracy, organized training to teach and learn paramilitary combat tactics, bringing and contributing paramilitary gear, weapons, and supplies, including knives, batons, camouflage combat uniforms, tactical vests with plates, helmets, eye protection, and radio equipment to the Capitol grounds, breaching and attempting to take control of the Capitol grounds in an effort to prevent, hinder, and delay the certification of the Electoral College vote, and using force against law enforcement officers while inside the Capitol. On the day in question, they formed stack formations, military formations on the east steps of the Capitol, and a second stack formed on the west side of the Capitol. Certain members breached the grounds, and other teams were prepared to rapidly transport firearms and other weapons into Washington, D.C. in support of the operations aimed at using force to stop the lawful transfer of presidential power. This is a fully detailed indictment that the Justice Department has issued against 19 individuals who are facing up to 20 years in prison. I took some time with that because I want to reassure people that our systems are in place, that democracy is fighting back, and that we can have some confidence that these cases will go forward. This Justice Department will be in place for the next 3 years, irrespective of any other midterm elections. Now, some will ask at this very moment, well, what about everybody else who enabled the election fraud, the stop the steal and the big lie? And I want to share with this group some information that is only beginning to get public attention, because I think it goes to the question of how can we as a country respond to this crisis. It is being asked whether public officials who participated in the January 6th insurrection, congresspersons, state legislators, and Donald Trump can run for public office in light of their conduct in and around the insurrection and the other efforts to undermine our democracy. It may come as a surprise to many that in the 14th Amendment, following the Civil War, a very important provision was added by Congress and adopted and made part of our US Constitution. And it's known as Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And one of my purposes here at ICUJP and anywhere that I speak is to empower you to understand the news as it unfolds. And already the influence of this section of the Constitution is unfolding. So let me, and bear with me to read this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Now, this is a very important clause, and it was written in the wake of the Civil War and the defeat of the Confederacy. And Congress at the time saw it as anathema that former members of the Confederacy who had sworn to support the US Constitution and were in various positions of power in state and federal government could ever be reelected to office. And they wrote into the 14th Amendment these sections. And serious constitutional scholars, my analysis, and others suggest that this section is the foundation to prevent state and federal elections. And I will say today, the election of Donald Trump as president in 2024. Breaking down this section, there are several parts that one has to meet if they're going to be disqualified from holding any office in state or federal government. They must previously have held or currently occupy what's called a triggering office in which they took an oath to support the Constitution. So they have in the past or have currently served in such an office, and the offices are broad, including all congressmen, senators, the President of the United States, the Vice President, and others. They have to have engaged in covered conduct, that is insurrection, rebellion, or giving aid or comfort to American enemies. And then they will be disqualified for life from holding any banned office unless Congress, by a vote of 2/3, allows an exemption. Now, let's see how this applies to specific individuals. Representative Mo Brooks clearly is within the scope of this section. He previously served in the Alabama legislature and is currently a member of Congress. And as I'll come to in a moment, he engaged in that kind of conduct. Rudy Giuliani has previously taken an oath to support the Constitution as mayor of New York and elsewhere. Now, the president is an officer of the United States, and he would qualify as well. Now, what kind of conduct would apply? You must have engaged in insurrection. And there's detailed analysis of this, which I won't go into. But engaging in insurrection, the courts have found back in the post-Civil War era that a voluntary effort to assist the insurrection or rebellion or to bring it to a successful termination, even without taking up arms yourself. Other sources suggest that incitement of an insurrection constitutes engagement. One district court in Illinois in 1894 found that every person who knowingly incites, aids, or abets an insurrection, no matter what his motives, may likewise be an insurgent. What is an insurrection? This question pervades all of this. It's an open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of a law in a city or state or government. It may be rising in opposition to a particular act or law without a design to renounce the entirety of government. So commentators that I believe are reliable and authoritative believe that what happened on January 6th clearly is an insurrection, and that based on the evidence, many of the individuals I've mentioned have engaged in that. Now, there's a second category of aiding or giving comfort to America's enemies. Now, there was some suggestion that the word enemies only applies to foreign persons. But we learn that that is not true, because the very 14th Amendment was written in light of the Confederacy, which were domestic insurrectionists. So aiding and comforting America's enemies. And when you use that language, which is broadly construed in our statutes, many of the people we're talking about are culpable under this section. There was Derek Evans, a freshman member of the West Virginia House of Delegates, who forced his way into the Capitol on January 6th. Representatives Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, and Paul Gosar engaged in scheming and exchanged emails scheming to put maximum pressure on Congress while they are voting, and who may have conducted reconnaissance tours for some of the insurrectionists. And there's more details of that kind. And Donald Trump, based on not only the buildup to January 6th, but his incitement on the rally before January 6th, qualifies for words of encouragement from one occupying an influential position. Now, many of you know that I am deeply committed to the First Amendment, and I would never support any criminal charges or the use of this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment based exclusively on protected constitutional speech. In fact, there was a socialist who they used this section. Victor Berger was a socialist from Wisconsin who won a seat in Congress in 2010 and again in 1910 and 1918. And he was barred from being seated as a congressperson because of his opposition to World War I. And unfortunately, this was an example of, during the first Red Scare, of excesses that can occur. And the Victor Berger case is a cautionary one, that we not get carried away in this attempt to hold insurrectionists and their enablers liable, that we turn around and violate the First Amendment. So you can be assured that I will be, and others are monitoring these prosecutions. These acts and the disqualification for federal office must be based on conspiracy to commit violence. We've had several presentations of the Charlottesville case in the Unite the Right rally. And you've heard me and Marjorie Cohen and others speak on the question that the civil judgment of $26 million against the white nationalists in Virginia did not violate the First Amendment, because they were conspiring to commit violence and did commit violence. I want to quickly note, because I promised to leave some time for questions, and it's dangerous to give anyone in my position a microphone. But I do want to recognize the concerns that Dick Bunce mentioned about the state legislatures and what they're doing now to prevent oversight of future elections. It's a real problem. The Brennan Center for Justice says that 17 state legislatures have enacted 28 new laws to restrict access to the right to vote. 61 bills are pending and moving through 18 state legislatures. Overall, lawmakers have introduced 389 restrictive bills in 48 states. I could list the variety of voting restrictions, serious voting restrictions that these laws are putting into place, as well as shifts in who within a state will have the authority to overturn an election or to monitor the counting of votes. So the Justice Department has already filed lawsuits in several states against these new laws. And the only way I can offer Dick Bunce and others any reassurance that democracy is fighting back is that these laws are being challenged in many states in federal court. Now, you could say back to me, as my title includes, the United States Supreme Court. And we have 6 conservative justices. The retirement of Stephen Breyer will not change that calculation. We may get a younger Black woman judge in a progressive set of values to strengthen the liberal wing of the court and who will have longevity on the court past older members of the conservative majority. But I am very disappointed in this Supreme Court. The recent case striking down OSHA's vaccine mandate showed how the conservative majority can torture the language even of a federal statute that gave OSHA the power to enact safety rules within the workplace, including those facing a new injury or a new disease, which COVID certainly is. And yet a 6-member supermajority swept past the law. So I am concerned that even if we seek refuge in the federal courts regarding these state legislatures, that these cases could end up in the US Supreme Court. There is a glimmer of hope because Roberts and Kavanaugh, of all people, upheld the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. And there's some glimmer in some of Roberts' opinions that he would strike down election laws of the kind I'm talking about. My moment of hope as we go into some questions and answers, and please feel free to use the reaction button to raise your hands. And I'll try to see anybody who's physically raising their hand as well. My sign of hope is organize, organize, organize. No matter what voting restrictions are in place, we need to get out the vote. We need to empower people to vote, to organize to vote, to contribute to get out the vote campaigns of the kind that Stacey Abrams led in Georgia and elsewhere. We still have a majority, according to surveys, of voters, registered voters, who will defend democracy and implement the kinds of values I've been talking about all morning. That is how our activism has to be put into place. I'm going to pause. I see 3 hands so far, and I will take each of them up in sequence. Carol Francis.
Yeah, could you, this is fantastic, but could you mention money, big money? In other cases, we see that we're up against well-funded opponents that we would never be able to match the money of, unless it's like 1 million people giving $1 as opposed to one person giving $1 million. But in this case, if there are just people emailing their constituents, their members of their organizations, does that come into place, or are there people who are well-funded, organizations that are well-funded and able to hire an incredible, who's funding this?
Yes, it's a very serious problem. Ironically, there is some studies have shown that big money does not win elections, that it influences public opinion and what we see and hear, but there are a variety of elections in which big money has not triggered a different result. I think public financing of political campaigns is our future. I think that we have to see elections as a public resource like the fire department and other community services, and fund elections through public money so that all of us are bearing that responsibility, and no large person or corporation can influence elections. That's going to take a lot of hard work going forward.
But Steve, is there big money going into those organizations that organize January 6th? Was that an issue?
Yeah, follow the money. There's a whole wing of the DOJ that apparently is looking at the money. Not a lot of that has been made public, but I think we will see more of that as these cases unfold and as the January 6th commission or committee unfolds. But I want to always spin it that everyone on this screen, whatever your financial means, should consider supporting political organizations and others so that we also add resources to our side of the balance sheet. Michael. You're on mute.
I was saying I really appreciate the detail that you gave and the extent of what was involved in that action on January 6th and beyond, and the fact that they're still basically normalizing it in Congress and Trump. I had a couple of thoughts. One was I think that it was possible, and the voter suppression that's going on is possible because of the undemocratic nature of the government of this country under the Constitution. Just the idea that we have an electoral college and that the electoral votes is what were being ratified by Congress at that moment, I think is just a reality that we have to recognize lends itself to exactly that kind of effort. So that's one thought. The other thing is, I understand why, in terms of the constitutional provision you cited, it's important to use the word insurrection because of that potential for disqualification. But I think a lot of people respond to the idea, well, it failed, so therefore it's not a problem. And in fact, I think it is. They have a very clear strategy of a protracted civil war that they've been waging for a while and are going to continue to wage beyond one insurrectionary event. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, that it's not only an insurrection. It is, they're using violence constantly, in state violence and right-wing violence to promote this tension and division. And the last, I just want to raise this for you to consider as a constitutional scholar. What if, this is in relation to the Supreme Court, what if Biden were to nominate 3 black women as opposed to just one replacement for Breyer?
And what would happen? What's the outcome of that?
Well, to say, okay, we're going to change the balance on the Supreme Court. I'm nominating 3 people.
Right. Very brief, and I agree with your first 2 points very much. Briefly on the last one, the U.S. Constitution does not indicate the number of Supreme Court justices. A lot of people may be surprised to hear that. The Supreme Court has had 11 members, 10, 7, 9. It is set by the Judiciary Act of Congress and would take a act of Congress to change the number of Supreme Court justices. Biden has appointed a commission on the Supreme Court to look at term limits, to look at the aging out of justices, staggering their terms, or shifting the number of Supreme Court justices. The problem, of course, is when you're in power, you feel very bold about taking actions like that. What if, and I'll be partisan here, the Republican Party is in control of the next 3 Supreme Court nominees in an expanded court? We could have 9 members, all of whom are conservative, and get nowhere with the Supreme Court. So it's a very difficult issue. I don't know that the optics of nominating 3 Black women would get us anywhere. I think he wants to put all his cards in one basket. I'm happy to say that we are joined by my high school friend from New York, giving us a national breath today. Jeff Futter, I'm so pleased to see you this morning.
Good. Now I have to have a good question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Steve, my question to you is a serious one, of course. What about the pursuit of the organizers and the leaders of the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol, including possibly the former president, on a criminal basis? I mean, you recited all of the attackers and insurrectionists who are in the numbers of the hundreds who are facing charges. But if they were galvanized by a conspiracy or insightful words from other leaders, these are the people that should be subject to criminal charge, beyond the issue of preventing them from assuming public office in the future under the 14th Amendment.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. I do believe, first of all, there is a grand jury convened in Georgia because of Trump's effort to find 11,008 votes and his intimidation in that election counting as a criminal act. I believe everything I told you about seditious conspiracy applies to Donald Trump. And it not only applies to him for the lead up to the rally where he incited the insurrectionists, but his conduct as president thereafter, in the hours during the attack on the Capitol, was a dereliction of duty. And I believe, combined with the memos that are coming out, the meetings that were held, is sufficient probable cause to indict Donald Trump criminally for the actions arising before, during, and after January 6th. It'll be a question of Merrick Garland's will and strength, the belief that they can get a jury beyond a reasonable doubt to accept those facts and charges and to convict him. And we're putting aside, in your home state, of charges in Manhattan and in the state of New York. But I'm willing, despite any protection of his free speech rights, I do not believe those, if you'll excuse the expression, trump his criminal conduct. And I do believe he is subject to criminal prosecution in several jurisdictions. I see 2 final questions. Anthony?
I just want to first of all say, Steve, you've outdone yourself.
Okay,
this is such an amazing presentation you've given, very helpful. You brought up Georgia, which is one of the things I was going to ask you about. But one of the things that puzzles me is whether or not Trump can be subpoenaed and compelled to testify under oath. It's been my dream for several years that this would happen, because as we know, Trump can't have 2 consecutive sentences without perjuring himself. And so I'm wondering why it's so difficult to get him to be testifying under oath, since Clinton was obliged to testify under oath for a really minor infraction, namely a sexual issue. But do you see any chance that that Trump could be subpoenaed? And if he were, could he simply refuse to testify, and what would the consequences be?
Good, that's a good question. Let me take Stephen Fisk's question and then combine my final answers.
Yeah, Steve, I understood that you said that the 3/5 compromise, or that aspect that was installed in the Constitution, was still there. Did you mean that it was part of our consciousness of racism and white supremacy in the United States? Because I understand that the Emancipation Proclamation and the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment eradicated that clause.
Thank you. Let me take both of those up. Yes, I do believe that Donald Trump is subject to subpoena in a variety of proceedings, civil, criminal, he could take the Fifth Amendment, civil, he could take the Fifth Amendment. I believe efforts are underway to do that. I am a little disturbed that both Congress and the grand juries that are convened through the Department of Justice are tippy-toeing around Donald Trump. He is a private citizen. He is subject to subpoena like any one of us or anyone else involved in these actions. We know that others have begun to take the Fifth Amendment, but that is his constitutional right to do so. And I would hope that every enforcement mechanism will be used aggressively. His lawyers have raised specious and frivolous grounds, which even the United States Supreme Court has rejected when it comes to financial records of his lending institutions and elsewhere. That is one glimmer where the Supreme Court has done the right thing so far. So I do think he should be subpoenaed, his testimony should be taken, and he should be exposed to public disclosure. What I meant by 3/5, the words continue to stain the Constitution. They are still in the Constitution. We did have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The Emancipation Proclamation was more temporal in terms of freeing enslaved people who were in Confederate regions. And I certainly think any constitutional lawyer would say that the 3/5 clause is inoperative in light of those constitutional amendments. My point was close to what you said, that it is still a stain on the Constitution. The 13th Amendment still I'm not going to quote it today for time. Go look up the 13th Amendment and notice that slavery is banned except as punishment for crime. And we have slavery in US prisons today, making products and providing services to commercial enterprises while people are incarcerated. There is a move to delete that phrase from the 13th Amendment to make the ban on slavery absolute. It is actual conditional. And if you go to the documentary 13th on Netflix, you will see a complete exposition of this issue. My point is that our Constitution was flawed from the beginning. It is still stained with those provisions. And as a result, it is shameful to live in a country that still has those provisions in our founding document. I do want to thank everybody today. I had a little bit of other material, but I overloaded you. All of the information I've talked about today, you can find at the Department of Justice website and elsewhere. I promised this group to do my part in keeping you up to date on these issues, to looking for places where ICUJP can act and where our constituent organizations can act as well. And by way of transition, I welcome Marcy Winograd, who's here. I'm about to turn the program back for Rose's reflection and then your discussion. All of this is for naught if this world is subjected to a nuclear holocaust. So limiting and restricting nuclear weapons is as important a goal as anything I've talked about today. I really do thank every one of you. You know I have this time commitment and must leave you today. I saw the notes in the chat. Phil, I'll talk to you separately about speaking to your group. You all have my email address. If you'd like any presentation along the lines that I've given you today to other organizations or groups, please just let me know. And I will be on Jim Lafferty's radio show Wednesday at 2 o'clock on KPFK 90.7 FM, elaborating on some of the very issues we talked about today. So thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Steve, very much. And thank you for giving us a little bit more of your time than we expected. Michael, are you muted? Michael Novick. I hope everybody's muted. So we'll next hear from Rose Leibowitz, who is going to give us her reflection. Then I would like to call on Nyabingi Kuti and Marcy Winograd to talk to us about something that I think is of core importance to ICUJP and very close to the heart of one of our founders, George Regas. So Rose Leibowitz, would you please give us your reflection today?
Okay, thank you. I started off by apologizing for not covering the Holocaust Memorial Day. I now have another slight one that what I'm going to be saying dovetails rather too neatly maybe with a lot of what you've just heard, so do bear with me. I don't think the last few years would leave anybody to doubt that America is in a crisis of confidence. Those on the left spent 4 years during 45's reign worrying that America was turning into an autocracy and losing its democratic principles. The president at the time did not seem to abide by the norms of presidential behavior. Now, those on the right are raising concerns about authoritarianism and the norms of the executive branch. Both sides have disputed the integrity of elections for different reasons. Both sides are concerned about the aspects of freedom. As an example, whether it is freedom for a woman to control her own body in terms of reproductive health, or freedom for that same woman to control her own body in terms of not having a vaccination against a highly infectious disease. They even use the same words. While this has been by turn bemusing and angering me, it has also brought a new word into my vocabulary. This word is anocracy. There is a school of thought expressed in a book called How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them by Barbara Walter, who works at UC San Diego. I've just requested it from the library. She has studied civil wars and their origins in various places in the world. Her thesis is that it is possible for a country to slide from authoritarianism to democracy and back again, and at the time of the slide is likely to be met by civil war or insurrection. The civil war happens during the anocracy between the two areas. One example she uses is the fall of Yugoslavia after the death of Tito, who'd been in power for many, many years. The rise of racism and xenophobia, fueled by people on the far right, led to terrible things like the massacre in Srebrenica, and finally the breakup of that whole area into smaller countries based on ethnicity and religion. I can certainly add from my basic history, Pax Romana and Pax Britannica, the end of both of which led to the breakups of territories once they ceased to have power. As we all know, the Huns and Goths and Vandals invaded Rome and set the progress of Europe back by hundreds of years, while the partition of Pakistan in 1947 led to a tremendous number of deaths just after Britain had pulled out. However, the issue we are faced with goes the other way, a slide, hopefully not to happen, from democracy toward a strong autocratic leadership. She explains that such things happen when the political system has become remote and fossilized and therefore inefficient. That certainly describes Washington right now. If people feel they have a need that their elected politicians cannot deliver, they start making more and more demands. If they have populist politicians or priests to lead them, they can focus and cause mayhem. Naturally, everybody thinks about January the 6th. Very sadly, religion is a powerful force in an democracy, as we see here with the Christian nationalists, including many pastors who were arrested on January the 6th. Oh, well, we want to return to the halcyon days they imagine existed in the 1950s. For these reasons, those of us here need to discuss and work out how to argue back against the theology of Christian nationalism. Both the Bible and the Constitution are written in such a way they can be interpreted according to one's wishes and needs. She also points out the power of social media landing on one's personal computer or laptop or phone and telling things that are not true is very, very powerful. Those on the right have similar feelings about Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, and are frightened of a country they do not recognize. A lot of the people who are most threatened by social change have deep roots in the country and are from rural backgrounds. Barbara Walter pointed out that people from rural backgrounds seem to wield the most violent power. The Taliban is a good example, as were the rural people who took out arms to protect their Serbian, Slavic, or Croatian identities. She does not anticipate an all-out civil war in the United States at this time, but she does see more and more terrorist-type attacks and militia groups in areas where local law enforcement will leave them be or maybe even belong to them. No-go areas may grow. The prevalence of guns in this country has always terrified me, and I think the people are actually willing to use them, maybe on both sides. It's not a pretty picture. Not fun, but thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And I would like right now, unless there is any objection, to invite two of our guests to say a few words, because we have a period of announcements of both ICUJP activities and affiliate activities. We need to leave time for those, but I think it's very important to hear from Nyabinghi Kuti and from Marcy Winograd, and I'll leave it to the two of you to decide who goes first. Marcy and Nyabinghi.
Greetings, greetings. Yes, I appreciate the platform here, and I actually don't consider myself a guest of ICUJP. As I mentioned, I've been coming to this group since Father Regas was heading it. So, and I've always appreciated the consistent progressive stances of this group. So I'll just get right to the topic at hand here, the letter from Archbishop Wester. I found out about this, like most of you, through Democracy Now! And I think that this is really a timely issue. I think that right now we have a lot of traction to be able to push this kind of initiative forward. And I also think that one of our problems, I think our main problem is not the government. I think our main problem is our lack of organizing effectively to challenge the government. And if we don't change how we're doing things, the government is gonna keep winning. So as I mentioned earlier, when I first got on the call, I'm glad that Marcy brought this to the group, because I really don't think the group would have responded the same way if I brought it. So I would, and I'm seeing a lot of similar situation in the Black community. The way we're doing things, we're not, there's a lot of, and I'm not saying that this group is arrogant, but I'm seeing a lot of arrogance in the progressive movement and the lack of follow-up. So, and I think I've been very inspired by Code Pink and what Marcy and Medea are doing. I really look forward to their regular conferences and information. And I saw Marianne Williamson in one of their meetings recently, and she really said something that really resonated with me, even though I might have heard it before. And that was that we've had faced very high obstacles before, abolishing slavery, the right to vote, just tons of issues that we've overcome. And I noticed someone—
Nyabinghi, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have very little time. And I think what you have to offer us that is so important is to tell us about the Archbishop's letter and what the Archbishop is actually saying, what Pope Francis has said, and what we can do to support that. I apologize again for interrupting you, but we do have very limited time, and I see you and Marcy as messengers for of peace and nuclear war abolition. So that's what I would really like to hear about from you, because I think a lot of our members may not be aware, as you are, of what the Archbishop did and what we might do in response. Thank you.
Okay, well, maybe Marcy should go, because I really don't like being cut off, just to be honest with you. And, maybe I'll let Marcy take over from here.
All right, thank you, Nye. And thank you, David, and everyone involved in ICUJP. I feel honored to be with you today. I know your roots are deep in the peace movement, and I so honor that. I wanted to ask you, Nyabinghi brought this to my attention. I thought it was really important that we reach out to you to in turn reach out to the Archbishop of Los Angeles, Archbishop Gomez, to either endorse a letter that was published by the Archbishop of Santa Fe for nuclear disarmament, or write his own letter. What happened was the Archbishop of Santa Fe went to Hiroshima and saw and heard firsthand about the devastation from the US atomic bombing, and was so moved that he came back and he issued a pastoral letter to support Pope Francis's statements about the immorality of possessing nuclear weapons. The Archdiocese, he said, we need to figure out concrete steps toward abolishing nuclear weapons and permanently ending the nuclear threat. And he felt that it was particularly salient for him to issue this call in New Mexico, where we have the Sandia and Los Alamos laboratories working on nuclear weapons, and at a time when we are facing a $1.7 trillion, what they call it, nuclear modernization. That's a euphemism for nuclear rearmament that has been underway for a while, and Biden has thrown his support behind it as well. This is particularly critical right now as we face this conflict in Ukraine that could, God forbid, unfold as a nuclear confrontation between two nuclear armed nations. And the US is, in my opinion, being extremely intransigent in this. But beyond that, I would ask that this organization throw your support behind the Archbishop's letter, the Archbishop of Santa Fe. Ask Gomez to issue a similar letter or endorse the letter, and maybe even go one step beyond. I don't know, this is something that perhaps is for a longer conversation, but ask those who work in the nuclear weapons industry to leave that industry, to find a way to leave that industry because it is immoral, to plan for the extinction of the human race. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy, and I apologize again. I'm a facilitator in training. I apologize to Nye, and I ask you to come back if there's anything that you would like to add to what Marcy said.
Yeah, I pretty much think that in your email, you said that you believe that ICUJP should commend the Archbishop and urge Archbishop Gomez to endorse his letter to Brother Weston and craft a personal letter of his own. So for the people of the Archdiocese. So I think that should be the next steps. Getting Archbishop Gomez to write a letter and then getting that letter out to a broader section of the community.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for being here and for having patience with me. And I believe that we don't have much time for discussion right now, and we also have announcements. But I wanted to tell the two of you that I think the next step is for the board of ICUJP to craft a public statement in support of Reverend Wester and urging Archbishop Gomez to follow suit and to also cite the statements of Pope Francis. I think you might agree about that, because Pope Francis has gone so far as to say that the mere possession of nuclear weapons is a sin. So I think we need to, the board of ICUJP needs to talk about that. We need to consult with all of our members, and I think we should act quickly, and we should also discuss further actions, even going so far as to engage in civil disobedience at the federal building or in front of the gates of Northrop Grumman or other contractors, and using the words of these leaders of the Catholic clergy and other clergy who may want to join them. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for calling our attention to this event. It's amazing how little attention it got. The Archbishop actually announced his letter on January 11th, and I didn't find out about it until 2 days ago on Democracy Now! So I would say that the mainstream corporate media has been very, very muted in their in taking. They have not taken this announcement seriously. So it's time to hear from folks who may have announcements of ICUJP activities or affiliate activities.